My boyfriend kept calling a coworker harmless at my birthday brunch. The clapping stopped, and a matching calendar invite turned it into a public overlap, claimed just as my mother questioned our lease plans out loud. I should have known the second the clapping stopped that the problem was no longer just between me and Eli. We were 10 minutes into my birthday brunch, in one of those hotel alcoves that tries to look private without actually being private. All soft curtains and polished brass and people close enough to hear silverware if it hit the plate wrong. My mother had insisted on doing something grown and tasteful this year, which in her language meant expensive pastries, family photos before anyone got tired, and way too much attention on my relationship. Eli had spent the morning acting easy. Too easy. He kissed my cheek, poured coffee for my mother, kept calling his coworker Dana harmless every time her name came up in the little side comments that had already been floating around for 2 weeks. Then his phone lit up in the middle of the table. Not face down, not hidden, just sitting there beside the mimosa pitcher like he had nothing to worry about. One of my cousins had asked to see the photos from the concert we went to last month, and Eli had unlocked his phone to pull up the album. He handed it across the table, and before my cousin even swiped, a calendar notification slid down across the top of the screen. Dana and Eli, weekly check-in, Sunday, 11:30 a.m. The clapping had only just died because my mother had made everyone raise glasses to me, and the room went dead in a different way after that banner appeared. Not loud dead. Worse, the kind where people suddenly get careful with their faces. My cousin looked at the screen, then at me, then placed the phone back down like it was hot. Eli moved too late. That was what I remember first. Not the words. The delay. He saw the notification. His hand twitched toward the phone. He didn't snatch it up right away. He just stared for half a second too long, which gave everybody else time to do the same. And because it was Sunday, and because it was exactly the time we were all sitting there at brunch, and because Dana had already become a recurring name in our apartment, in a way I had told myself was annoying but maybe not serious, the room did the math before anyone spoke. My mother, of course, was first. "I thought Sunday mornings were for apartment tours," she said. She didn't even raise her voice. She just said it into the silence, crisp and flat, and it landed harder than if she'd yelled. Eli grabbed the phone and swiped the notification away. "It's nothing." No one said anything for a second. I heard one fork tap against a plate from the far end of the table. Somebody shifted in their chair. The waiter at the edge of the alcove, who had been coming in with another pot of coffee, paused just long enough to realize this was a bad moment and quietly backed out again. I looked at Eli. "Weekly?" He gave me the same expression he had been giving me for days whenever Dana came up. Calm, slightly amused, like I was reaching for a dramatic reading of something ordinary. "It's a work thing. At brunch? It's a reminder, not a meeting happening right now." My mother's eyes went from his face to mine and back again. I could already feel the lease sitting between us at the table even before she said it out loud. The lease was not abstract. We had been looking at a place in Westwood for 3 weeks. We had my mother's name ready as backup because our credit wasn't perfect and the landlord wanted someone older with assets he could call if we suddenly became unstable children in expensive shoes. My mother set her glass down. "I'm not co-signing anything if I'm about to watch you move in with a man who schedules private check-ins with another person on Sunday brunch." Eli laughed once. Not because it was funny, because he couldn't believe she went there that fast. "Mrs. Harlan, seriously, it's not like that." I hate that part when I replay it. Not because he used her last name, because I remember the exact sting in my chest when he said, "It's not like that," and I still had no idea what like that meant anymore. Not affair. Not friendship. Not exactly. Something in between had its own kind of humiliation, especially in front of family. Not a body in a room. A priority. A rhythm. A private lane I had not been admitted into. I said, "Why is it weekly?" He shrugged one shoulder. "Because we're on a project. That meets on Sundays." "It doesn't meet on Sundays. It's just when we reset." My mother blinked. "You reset your week with your coworker?" "Not like God." He looked around the table like the problem was all of us hearing him too literally. That made it worse, because if it really had been some standard boring work sync, there were 10 cleaner ways to say it. Team review, client prep, planning block, shared deliverable. Instead, he had said reset, which sounded intimate enough to make my skin prickle and vague enough to be useless. I tried to keep my voice steady. You told me Dana barely matters. She doesn't matter like this. Then what does she matter like? He ran a hand over his mouth. Not angry yet. Cornered, maybe. Or just embarrassed. The trouble was, I could not tell if he was embarrassed because the thing looked bad or because it was bad. Those are not the same, but from across a brunch table, they wear the same face. The waiter came back in, brave or poorly timed, and started lowering plates of French toast and eggs Benedict nobody was going to touch. Soft shift, food, silverware, coffee, normal service continuing while my mother sat there with that expression she gets when she thinks she has predicted a disaster before anyone else has admitted it. This is exactly what I meant, she said to me, not even pretending to include him. You keep saying I worry too much, and then something like this shows up in the middle of the table. Eli straightened. Something like what? A calendar reminder? A private recurring entry, she said. On Sunday. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That was the second bad pause. I noticed it because my entire body had gone into that awful alert state where every small delay feels like evidence. I also knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that I was not neutral. Dana had become a sore spot before today. I had asked too many questions this week. I had watched Eli answer some too quickly and dodge others with jokes. If someone wanted to say I came into brunch already looking for proof, they would not be completely wrong. But a matching calendar invite sitting on his phone in front of my mother was not something I had invented. I said, "Did she get the same invite?" His eyes flicked to me. "Tiny move, tiny mistake. It's just synced," he said. "Between you and her? That's how invites work." My mother leaned back in her chair. "No, shared invites with coworkers do not usually look like pet arrangements." "Pet arrangement?" Eli repeated. I should have told her to stop. Maybe a better person would have. But the truth is I was too busy staring at his phone and thinking about how many Sundays I had spent asking whether he wanted to go look at apartments. Only to hear he was tired, overwhelmed, not in the mood, maybe next weekend. Meanwhile, there was apparently a standing check-in with Dana at exactly the kind of hour couples protect for themselves when they still want a life together. I held out my hand. "Show me." Eli didn't move. That was when I understood the brunch was over, no matter how pretty the plates looked. He looked at my hand, then at my face, then at my mother, and somehow managed to make all three of us feel like we were the problem. "Seriously?" he said. I kept my palm out. "Yes, it's a calendar invite, Adam." That was another thing I clocked immediately. He only used my full name like that when he wanted me to sound unreasonable by comparison. Adam, as in calm down. Adam, as in do not start. Adam, as in you are about to embarrass both of us, and I am going to stand here wearing patience until everyone agrees. My mother folded her napkin once, very neatly, and placed it beside her plate. That little move scared me more than if she had started shouting. It meant she was shifting from brunch guest to housing risk mode. She had already stopped thinking about whether he was nice, polite, presentable. She was calculating whether she wanted her name tied to his for a 12-month lease. I said, "If it's just work, show me." He unlocked the phone but didn't hand it over. Instead, he angled it toward himself, tapped twice, scrolled, tapped again, and only then turned the screen toward me. Even that mattered. The extra motion, the delay, the idea that something needed arranging before I could see what he claimed was nothing. The event was there in the calendar app, plain enough. Dana and Eli, weekly check-in. Sundays, 11:30 a.m. Private, repeats weekly. No location, no notes visible, no team name, no company label. Just the two of them and the kind of title people give a standing thing when they expect to recognize it instantly without anybody else needing context. My mother leaned forward. "Why is it private?" "Because my whole calendar is private. That is not your whole calendar." "It is, actually." She gave him a look that I had spent 28 years learning to survive, and he, apparently, still thought he could joke past. Then why does this one sound like a date disguised as admin? Eli looked at me instead of her. You know Dana's been having a rough month. I did know that. That was what made the air leave my lungs for a second, because now we were no longer talking about whether the invite existed or whether it was recurring. We were talking about emotional positioning. Dana had a rough month. Dana needed support. Dana and Eli had a private weekly check-in on Sundays. Dana mattered enough to have a recurring protected block in the same part of the week when I was trying to plan our apartment search, our errands, our actual future. He had never used the phrase emotional affair, obviously. Nobody at a birthday brunch does. But the moment he shifted from work explanation to care explanation, the meaning got worse, not better. I said, so it's not just project. It started because of project stuff. And now? He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his phone. Now, she's a friend. My mother gave a short laugh under her breath. Oh, excellent. Please don't do that, Eli said. Do what? Hear you? He turned to me again, trying to keep the room narrowed down to us, even though that was impossible now. You know how this sounds, because your mother is making it sound like the ugliest version on purpose. That line almost worked on me for 1 second, which is maybe the ugliest thing I can admit. Because he was not entirely wrong. My mother absolutely was dragging it toward the worst available interpretation. She had disliked how often Dana's name came up long before I let myself care. She had asked too many pointed questions about boundaries. She had a talent for turning private discomfort into public leverage. If a viewer wanted to say she escalated the brunch before Eli had a chance to explain, they would not be inventing that. But he still had not denied the heart of it. Not cleanly. Not fast. He had not said, there is nothing between us. He had not said, I never hid anything. He had not said, you have the wrong idea. He kept saying versions of, it sounds bad. It isn't like that. Your mother is making it worse. I said, did you tell me about the weekly check-ins? They're not a secret. That is not what I asked. He exhaled hard. No, I didn't spell them out. My mother turned to me before I could answer. And you want me on a lease with this? There it was. The housing pressure, finally said without disguise. I wanted to tell her to stop making this about the apartment. I wanted to say she was using my birthday brunch to audition for moral superiority. But the apartment was already in it. She had paid the application fee. She had been emailing the landlord directly. If she pulled out, Eli and I were not moving anywhere together. Not this month. Maybe not at all. So when she asked the question, the practical part of my brain answered before the sentimental one could catch up. Yes, this mattered. Of course it mattered. The waiter came by with the coffee pot again and froze when nobody moved their cups. He hovered. I nodded at mine just to give him something to do. Soft shift. Coffee pouring, ceramic clink, normal service trying to stitch itself across a table that had already split. Eli set the phone down face down this time. Too late for that, too. He said more quietly, it's not romantic. My mother said, then why didn't you deny it faster? He looked at her like he couldn't believe she'd said that out loud. I almost flinched for him, which made me angry at myself. I don't owe you speed, he said. No, she replied. You owe him clarity. I hated when she was right, in a way that made me need her. That was maybe the worst family pressure there is. Not support, usefulness. She was not standing up for me because she suddenly understood my feelings. She was positioning herself as the adult who had seen the instability first, which meant if I kept choosing Eli, I would now be choosing against her judgment and her signature. I said, why Sunday? It's the only time she can breathe. There it was again. Not work, breath, reset, rough month. He was handing Dana emotional language he had not used for me in weeks. He saw my face change. That's not what I mean. It sounds exactly like what you mean. I'm trying to help someone. At 11:30 every Sunday. He looked away. Another bad pause. My mother did not miss it. You already had plans at 11:30 on Sundays. You were supposed to be house hunting. I missed 2 apartment tours. 3, I said. He turned back to me. You counted? That stung more than it should have, as if my problem was not the skipped tours, but the fact that I had noticed, as if remembering disappointment was the weird part. Yes, I said. I counted. He leaned back in his chair, shoulders tightening. This is why I didn't want to have this conversation with an audience. I almost said you brought the audience by leaving the phone on the table, but that was not really fair. He had not planned the invite to pop up. He had not planned my cousin to be holding the phone. He had not planned my mother to go for the lease in under 10 seconds. The bad luck was real. So was the reveal. Both can exist at once. That was another reason the whole thing felt dangerous. It was not a clean catch. It was an accidental public window into something that might have had a perfectly boring explanation if he had built any record of honesty first. But he hadn't. He had built a record of minimizing, so every ordinary detail now looked loaded. I pushed my untouched plate an inch away from me. Show me the date history. What? You said it started with project stuff. Fine. Show me when it started. He stared at me. Adam, show me. My mother didn't say anything this time. She didn't need to. She had gone still again, which meant she thought the next answer might decide whether she treated this as a relationship mess or a financial warning. Eli picked up the phone, thumb hovering over the screen, and for the first time all brunch, he looked less annoyed than afraid of the sequence itself. He held the phone like it weighed more than it should have. That sounds dramatic, but it is exactly what I saw. Not panic, not guilt, written cleanly across his face, just that subtle hesitation people get when they realize the next screen matters more than the one they already lost control of. Why? He asked. It was such a useless question that for a second I just stared at him. Because you said it started as project stuff. And if that's true, the timing should help you. He looked at my mother, maybe hoping she would finally back off if he played reasonable. She didn't. She sat there with both hands folded, her whole body communicating that she had already stepped into the role she liked best. Witness with leverage. Show him, she said. I'm not talking to you. No, she replied. You're trying not to talk to him. A few people at the far end of the table had started making the kind of low-side conversation that is really just cover noise. Nobody was leaving. Nobody was touching the pastries. The brunch had divided into a center and an edge, and everything that mattered was happening in the center now, inside the alcove's fake privacy. Eli unlocked the screen again. He tapped the event, then tapped into the recurrence details, then stopped. That stop told me almost as much as the invite had. What? I said. It's not going to show you what you think. That sentence is getting old. It started 6 weeks ago. I felt my shoulders go cold, because 6 weeks ago was before the apartment tours started getting skipped. Before Dana's name turned into a tiny recurring irritation in our kitchen. Before Eli began answering me in that careful, thinned-out way that always sounds patient, until you realize patience is being used as a weapon. 6 weeks ago meant the invite had been built at the exact point our life together should have been moving closer, and instead started feeling strangely rearranged around pockets I could not quite access. My mother said, 6 weeks. He shot her a look. I can count. Can you explain? He ignored her and turned the phone enough for me to see. The invite had indeed been created 6 weeks earlier. Same title, same recurring setting. Private, Sundays, 11:30. I said, that was before you told me Dana was barely even part of your week. She wasn't. She had a private weekly block. That doesn't mean what you're making it mean. Maybe not. There was still enough room for argument that I hated myself for feeling both vindicated and unsure at the same time. A recurring invite can be practical. It can also be intimate. The title was bad. The timing was bad. The secrecy was bad. But none of that translated neatly into proof, and Eli knew it. That was why he kept living in the space between explanation and accusation. Plenty of people survive in that space a long time. I said, what happened 6 weeks ago? He rubbed at the bridge of his nose. She had some stuff blow up at work. What stuff? Not mine to share. My mother let out one small breath that somehow managed to sound like a full judgment. How convenient. He snapped toward her. You don't get to do commentary like you've known me 5 minutes and already solved me. She didn't flinch. I don't need to solve you. I need to decide whether I'm tying my credit to yours. That landed hard. Harder than I expected. Maybe because it was the first time she had reduced him so openly from boyfriend to financial risk. I hated the cruelty of it. I also knew she was not bluffing. If she decided this relationship was unstable, the lease was dead, not delayed. Dead. The waiter returned with more coffee, and then clearly regretted his timing again. He poured for my uncle at the far end, skipped our cluster entirely, and drifted back out. Soft shift. Coffee scent, plates cooling, silverware untouched. The room kept pretending service could continue through humiliation. Eli leaned toward me and lowered his voice, as if bringing it down would make it private again. Adam, Dana was having a hard time. That is literally it. Then why private? Because she didn't want people in the office seeing a bunch of calendar chatter. So it was emotional. It was considerate. That's not a different answer. He looked down. There it was again. The little gap. The delay after a clean opening appears and he doesn't take it. He could have said, I never crossed a line. He could have said, I told you badly. He could have said, I was stupid, but nothing happened. Instead, he kept nudging everything sideways, away from romance, but not firmly into innocence either. That was when I realized the room itself had started interpreting for me. I could feel it. Not the words exactly, the body language. My cousin suddenly very interested in rearranging sugar packets. My aunt watching Eli's face more than mine. Two family friends who had come because my mother likes a full table doing that subtle thing, where they look down half a second too late after every sentence. Public overlap claim. That was what it had become, whether Eli liked the phrase or not. Not because the invite proved an affair, but because it showed him building a recurring private emotional space with someone else while still telling me she was harmless. I said, Did you ever plan to tell me this was weekly? He answered too fast that time. It wasn't important. That one might have hurt the worst. Because if he had admitted he hid it because it would look bad, I at least would have been speaking to the truth. But not important? A private recurring Sunday check-in with another person was not important while we were trying to choose where to live, how to merge bills, whether to move closer to his office or mine. That answer made me feel stupid in a more personal way. Like my standards themselves were the inconvenience. My mother looked at me, not him. Do you hear that? I did. Too well. Eli saw the shift and tried to soften. That came out wrong. No, I said. It probably came out right. He sat back and crossed his arms. Defensive now, not soothing. That change mattered. The whole morning he had been curated, easy, affectionate, almost overperforming normal. Now the edges were showing. You always do this, he said quietly. You take one uncomfortable thing and make it the whole story. That got under my skin because part of me feared it was true. Not fully true, but true enough to sting. I do have a habit of replaying, cross-referencing, stacking details until they start to feel definitive. My mother calls it vigilance when she wants it to sound flattering and obsession when she doesn't. Eli had always called it over-reading, right up until the moments it saved him from telling me something first. I said, and you always call it over-reading when the thing is real. That's not fair. Is Dana more emotionally inside your life than you told me? He stared at me. Not at my mother, not at the table, at me. Then he said, she needed me. I think I felt my whole face change, because there are sentences that can be technically innocent and still ruin a room. She needed me was one of them. Not work needed me, not the team needed me, not there was a crisis. She needed me. My mother said it before I could. And where exactly does that leave him? Eli didn't answer her. He didn't answer me either. I looked back at the invite and said, open one. What? One of the old Sundays. Open it. His thumb stayed still on the phone. Eli. He didn't argue this time. He just looked suddenly tired in a way that made me think he knew the date itself might be worse than the title. And that was when I remembered exactly which Sunday had first made me think something was off. It hit me all at once, because memory is cruel like that. Not a vague feeling. A specific Sunday. 3 weeks earlier, the one where we were supposed to meet the landlord in Westwood at noon, I had even changed shirts twice that morning because my mother kept insisting first impressions mattered when somebody was deciding whether to hand over keys. Eli had texted me at 10:50 saying he needed to push by an hour because work had turned into something weird. I remember the exact phrase because I had read it standing in my kitchen, already dressed, already annoyed, trying to decide whether to make it a fight or act flexible. We missed the viewing. The landlord filled the slot. My mother said that kind of thing was how you lost decent places in this city. Now I was staring at a recurring private Sunday check-in scheduled for 11:30. Open the one from June 12th, I said. Eli's head lifted. You remember the date? It was the Westwood viewing. My mother made a low sound in her throat. Not triumph exactly, but close enough to make me want to shove my chair back and leave both of them there. She was becoming more dangerous than him in a way I had not fully admitted until that moment. Eli was dodging. My mother was building the case into a housing verdict in real time. She was not helping me understand what happened. She was helping me arrive at a conclusion that justified her control. Eli looked at her before he looked back at me. Can she stop acting like a judge? My mother said, open the date. He held the phone tighter. No, just like that. No smoother wording. No, let's do this later. No, why would that help? Just no. Which of course helped no one but suspicion. I said, why not? Because I'm not doing forensic theater at your birthday brunch. The sentence would have landed better if he hadn't already spent the morning performing harmlessness so hard it felt rehearsed. I could hear the people at the far end of the table go quieter again. Someone's spoon clicked against china. Outside the curtained opening of the alcove, hotel staff kept moving through the corridor with trays and folded napkins and practiced smiles, all of them politely not seeing the center of our table fall apart. I held his gaze. You don't want theater, but you're okay with recurring private Sunday check-ins and then telling me she barely exists. She does barely exist in the way you keep implying. That is not an answer, because your question is loaded. It always comes back to that with people who want to live inside ambiguity. They never deny the shape, they object to the framing. They say loaded, unfair, dramatic, paranoid, intense, anything except the plain thing that would actually calm the room. My mother leaned in, elbows off the table because she is too controlled for that, but every inch of her pointed at him. If he will not open the date, that tells me enough. Eli snapped. No. It tells you what you want because you already think I'm unstable. Do I? She said. Or do I think you are comfortable becoming emotionally necessary to somebody else while my son is asking you to plan a home? That was the ugliest clean sentence anyone had said so far. And because it was ugly, it also felt precise. He looked at me then. Not angry, exactly. More like injured that she had named the overlap in front of everyone. And maybe that was fair. Maybe some part of me should have stepped in and told her to stop dragging him by the collar through language he had not chosen himself. But my chest was still tight with the image of that invite, that title, that Sunday hour, and the memory of myself dressed for the Westwood appointment while he was apparently unavailable in a way he never really explained. I said, just open the date. He didn't. That was the decision point, and I felt it. If I kept arguing meaning, we would spin forever. He would say care. I would hear intimacy. My mother would hear liability, and nobody would move. So I changed channels. I looked at my mother. If this were just bad boundaries, would you still pull off the lease? She blinked, clearly surprised I had turned to her instead of him. Define bad boundaries, she said. There it was. Not concern, leverage. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because the whole thing had shifted from boyfriend problem to housing tribunal so fast it made my skin crawl. I needed her for the lease. She knew it. Eli knew it. I knew it. That made every sentence she said sharper than his, because he could hurt me emotionally and I could still walk away tonight. She could change what happened next month with one phone call to a landlord. That's not what we're doing, I said. She gave me a cool look. You asked. No. I asked if there was any version of this that isn't an automatic deal breaker for you. For me, she said. Adam, I am not the one dating him. No, I said. You're the one holding the paper. That landed. Her mouth tightened. Soft shift again. Not from romance to contract this time, but from brunch spectacle to plain leverage. The room might have thought the drama was about Dana and Eli. It wasn't just that anymore. It was about whether I could even respond to this like a free adult when my next housing step ran through my mother's judgment. Eli saw that and moved fast for the first time in several minutes. "This is exactly what I told you would happen." I looked at him. "What?" "She turns everything into whether you can survive without her." My mother inhaled sharply. "Excuse me?" He was talking to me, though. Only me. "You want to know why I didn't tell you Dana was having a hard time? Because every time your mother gets one thread, suddenly your whole life is under review." I hated how much that shook me, because it contained enough truth to be useful to him. My mother absolutely did that. She wrapped practical support around moral commentary so tightly you forgot which part was the gift and which was the leash. If a viewer later said Eli was manipulative but not entirely wrong, I would not be able to dismiss that cleanly. But he was still using my mother's flaws to dodge his own choices. I said, "This is not about her unless you make it about her." He gave me a look that practically said too late. My mother stood up then, not fully away from the table, just enough to change the power in the alcove. Chairs shifted, heads turned again. She was not making a scene exactly. She was becoming one. "I'm going to make this simple," she said. "If either of you thinks I'm attaching my name to a lease while I'm listening to him say another person needed him every Sunday, you have mistaken me for someone reckless." There it was, the family member becoming more dangerous than the partner. Clear, public, immediate. She was not merely reacting. She was drawing material consequences before I had even decided what I believed. I felt heat rush into my face. "Sit down." "No." "Mom." "No, because you are trying to act rational inside something humiliating, and he is using that." Eli stood too, slower but no calmer. "You don't get to decide what this is." She turned to him. "Actually, where my credit is concerned, I do." The hotel manager at the corridor edge glanced in, clocked the standing adults and dead food, and kept walking. Smart. Nobody here was in a rescuable mood. I stayed seated on purpose. I don't know why that felt important, but it did. Maybe because I needed one stable point while the other two turned into opposing forces around me. I looked at Eli's phone still in his hand. Last chance. June 12th. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then he said very quietly, "If I open that, this gets worse before it gets better." And for the first time, I believed him enough to be afraid of the date itself. I stared at him for a second, because there are some sentences that do not belong to innocent people. Not always. That is the maddening part. Sometimes a person says this gets worse before it gets better because they know a context detail will sound awful before it sounds human. Sometimes they say it because the first layer is already bad and the second layer is worse. Eli had positioned himself so badly by then that I could not tell which kind he was, and I hated him for putting me in a spot where even his attempt at honesty felt strategic. My mother was still standing. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Her height over the table changed everything. It turned a relationship rupture into a parental ruling. The whole alcove seemed to tilt toward her, toward the person who had money, age, and a name on the paperwork we needed. I said, "Then open it." He looked at my mother again first. That tiny move almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it revealed the actual geometry of the room. Not me and him, me, him, and the person who could materially punish the next month of my life. "Sit down," I said to her. She didn't move. "Why?" "Because I'm asking you to. You should be asking him why another person gets a weekly private hour." "Mom." "No." That one word landed harder than I expected. Maybe because it sounded so calm. She was not trying to protect me in a way I could lean on. She was taking possession of the situation. The birthday brunch had become a stage where she could be publicly justified for every concern she had aired about Eli, and she was not going to surrender that momentum because I asked politely. Eli exhaled through his nose and finally tapped the date. June 12th opened. Same title, same private setting, same 11:30 start. But there was one extra line visible in the old entry that was no longer showing on today's recurring view. Notes. He must have collapsed them on the new screen without my noticing, because now there it was in plain text under the entry, half a sentence cut off by the app preview. Need to check in before she goes to her mom's place again. He tried to scroll before I finished reading it. Too late. My mother saw enough to inhale sharply. I saw enough to feel my entire chest go hollow. Who is she? I asked. Eli pressed his thumb over the note line. It's not what you think. There was the sentence again. Rotten from overuse. Completely useless, and somehow still capable of making things worse every single time he chose it. I stood up then. Not dramatically. I just stood because sitting, while everyone else handled my humiliation for me, had become unbearable. Who? I repeated. Is she? He looked at me, finally, with no patience left in his face at all. Dana. My mother laughed once, sharp and joyless. Perfect. I ignored her. Why would Dana be going to her mom's place again? He scrubbed a hand over his jaw. Because she was falling apart for a while. That sounds intimate. It was support. You wrote check in before she goes to her mom's. I know what I wrote. The room around us had gone almost theatrically still. Even the family friends at the far end had stopped pretending to be somewhere else mentally. People can hear the difference between work awkwardness and emotional displacement. Work awkwardness makes a table uncomfortable. Emotional displacement makes people choose sides in their own heads before dessert arrives. I said, you were building recurring support around another person while telling me she barely mattered. She did barely matter in the way you kept implying. Stop answering a different question. He looked exhausted. Not because I was wrong, I thought. Because he had run out of room to keep redirecting what the thing was called. My mother said, Adam, that is enough. I turned on her so fast it surprised both of us. No, it's enough for you because now you can feel right. Her face changed, just a fraction, wounded and furious at once. Good, maybe that was cruel. But I was done pretending her role in this felt clean. She was not only a witness anymore, she was a pressure source all by herself. I am trying to keep you from making a legal mistake, she said. A lease is not a legal hostage situation. It becomes one when one party lies. And it also becomes one when my mother decides my housing depends on agreeing with her in public. That hit. Eli saw it hit too. I could tell by the way he straightened, like something had opened for him. This, he said quietly, gesturing between us, is why I kept trying to handle things carefully. I looked at him. By hiding them? By not dropping a complicated mess into a family system that turns everything into leverage. That sentence was half confession and half excuse, which was pretty much his whole brand by now. Still, I couldn't pretend it meant nothing. My mother had absolutely turned the brunch into leverage. He had also absolutely built the conditions for that to happen by giving another person a private recurring space in his week and then lying downward about her importance to me. Both could be true. That was what made it miserable. I said, Did you want her? He blinked. Not because he was shocked, I asked. Because I had finally said the plainest version. No, he said. Too fast this time. I don't know why that bothered me more than the earlier delays, but it did. Maybe because now he knew what a slow answer cost him. Maybe because he had finally learned where to deny cleanly, which meant he could have done it sooner and chose not to. My mother heard it too. That answer was ready. He snapped. Would you like me to answer slowly so you can enjoy the performance more? Nobody is enjoying this. You are. That shut her up for a second, which was almost a miracle. I asked him. Then what was this? He looked at the phone in his hand. Not the invite. The note. The line about checking in before she goes to her mom's place again. A sentence that was, on its face, compassionate. Also intimate. Also wildly inappropriate if the person writing it is building a home with someone else and calling the recipient harmless at the same time. I thought she needed structure, he said. The answer made me laugh in disbelief. Structure. She was coming apart every weekend. Her mom's place made things worse. I was trying to keep her steady. At the exact hour, you kept brushing me off. I know. That one word mattered, because it was the first time all brunch that he let consequence sit there without trying to redirect it immediately. I know. Not you're overreacting. Not it looks bad. Not your mother is making this ugly. Just I know. It helped and hurt at the same time. My mother sat down at last, but only because she sensed the shape of the room changing again. Not towards safety, towards something more arguable, less obvious than an affair, more damaging than a work excuse. The kind of thing that makes everyone lean in because now the line is blurrier and the loyalty question gets worse. I said, "Did you ever think maybe I should know you were becoming this important to someone else?" "Yes." "And?" He looked at me. "I thought if I told you too early you'd hear cheating before you heard context." I almost said maybe because you knew how it looked. Instead, I asked the part that mattered more. "And if you told me later?" He held my gaze. I thought maybe by then it would already be over. There it was. Not a confession. Not innocence either. A private emotional arrangement he expected to outgrow before I caught sight of it. I could feel everyone at the table absorb that sentence differently. My mother heard risk. My aunt probably heard proof. A few people likely heard kindness gone messy. I heard betrayal in a form that would be harder to explain to anyone who wanted clean labels. I picked up my phone from beside my untouched plate and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Eli saw the movement. "What are you doing?" "Deciding whether I'm still staying for cake." He opened his mouth, then stopped. And for the first time, since the invite surfaced, he looked less worried about my mother than about the possibility that I might choose my next move without either of them managing it. Nobody touched the cake. That was the first thing I noticed after I sat back down for a second and then realized I couldn't actually stay seated. My mother had arranged a whole little display near the end of the alcove. White frosting, stupid gold candles, one of those bakery boxes folded open like a presentation. 15 minutes earlier, it had looked thoughtful. Now it looked like evidence from another timeline. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. My mother said, "Adam," not loudly, just enough to make the room listen harder. Eli stayed still, but his eyes followed every movement, like he thought he could somehow keep this contained if he didn't make one more wrong gesture. "I'm leaving," I said. "For where?" my mother asked. That question irritated me instantly. Not because she cared, because it sounded like permission disguised as concern. "I don't know yet." She pressed her lips together. "You should come home with me." No. There it was again. Not support. Retrieval. A return to her orbit, where tonight's humiliation could be translated into a series of future decisions I would be expected to make under supervision. She would call the landlord before noon. She would tell my aunt some edited version that still made her look prescient. She would tell me she was only trying to help. I could see all of it lined up already. Eli heard the question under her offer, too. I could tell from the way his shoulders shifted. "Don't go with her just because she's forcing the room," he said. My mother turned on him instantly. "Forcing the room? You built a private weekly ritual with another person and expected the rest of us to call it nothing." He looked back at her, tired and sharp at the same time. "No, I expected him to hear it from me without you standing over him like a credit agency. That was rude. Also not entirely false." I hated how often truth kept arriving wrapped in the wrong mouth. I said, "Stop talking about me like I'm outside this table." That shut both of them up for one glorious second. I stood fully then, not halfway, not maybe. The chair scraped the floor just enough to make people at the edge of the brunch stop pretending they were involved in separate conversations. My cousin looked down. My aunt did not. The family, friends, near the pastries, gave me that awful soft-eyed expression people use when they want credit for compassion during something they will absolutely retell later. Eli finally got to his feet, too. "Adam, wait. For what?" "So we can finish this." Without my mother hearing? Without the table hearing? Without the lease being part of it? You had weeks for that. His face changed at weeks. He knew I was right on that point. And he knew I knew it. The truth was, I still did not know exactly what had happened between him and Dana. That remained the ugliest part of the whole brunch. The thing on the phone was intimate enough to hurt, vague enough to argue, and timed badly enough that every interpretation came preloaded with embarrassment. Maybe he had become emotionally central to her in a way he told himself was temporary. Maybe he liked being needed. Maybe he crossed a line in his head but not in his body and thought that distinction would save him. Maybe he really had planned to end the Sunday check-ins before I ever saw them and genuinely believed that would make it different. I did not know. I knew enough. My mother rose again, the second Eli stepped closer to me. "Do not crowd him," she said. "I'm not crowding him. You are not helping," I said to her. That landed because she actually took a step back. Small victory, strange one, but I needed it. The waiter appeared at the edge of the alcove, holding the cake knife like he had wandered into the wrong courtroom. He looked at the three of us, at the untouched plates, at the dead center of the table, and quietly retreated again. The room might have laughed on another day. Today, no one did. Eli lowered his voice. "Can we go outside for 5 minutes?" I almost said no immediately. Then I stopped myself. Not because I trusted him, but because I wanted one thing tonight that had not been filtered through my mother's face. "I'll walk to the lobby," I said. "That's it." My mother said, "Absolutely not." I turned to her. "There it is." "What?" "The part where you think this belongs to you now. It belongs to your future if you move in with him. And if I leave with you, it belongs to you." Her mouth tightened. For once, she didn't have a clean answer ready. Good. Eli glanced between us, then made the mistake of saying, "This is what I was trying to avoid." My mother laughed, low and disbelieving. "By scheduling private Sundays with another person?" He ignored her. "Adam, I should have told you sooner. I know that. That was probably the closest thing to a plain admission I was going to get before somebody weaponized the next sentence. It almost worked on me, too. Not enough to fix anything, enough to make leaving feel heavier. I said, "Sooner would have been before I heard about it from your phone." He nodded once. "Yes, and before, she was part of the explanation." Another nod. Slower. That mattered because it separated the harms. Him first, my mother second. Not the same offense, but both active, both shaping what came next. My mother reached for her bag. "I am calling the landlord and telling him to hold." I turned so fast I surprised myself. "You are not calling anyone yet." She blinked. "Adam, no. This is exactly what I mean. You are making decisions because you like how justified you feel right now. I like being careful. You like being right." The words sat there. No taking them back. No softening them. A few people at the table looked down at once, which usually means you hit something true enough to make even bystanders uncomfortable. My mother's face went hard in that polished way she gets when she has been embarrassed and immediately decides the embarrassment must be repaid through control. "If you choose to ignore what happened here, do it without my name on a lease." There it was, final enough to count. Not a scream, not a scene, a condition. Housing fallout, clean and cold. Eli closed his eyes briefly. "Mrs. Harlan, don't." She picked up her bag. Not one word. And just like that, she became the most dangerous person in the alcove, not because she had the worst secret, because she had the quickest consequence. I looked at Eli and knew he saw it too. Whatever else he had hidden, whatever else he had minimized, he was suddenly not the only one capable of turning my life materially smaller by morning. I said, "I'm not going home with either of you." My mother drew in breath to argue. I lifted my hand and she actually stopped. Maybe the first useful gift she had given me all day. "I mean it," I said. "No landlord calls today. No speeches, no fixing the table, no version sent around before I decide what happened to me." Eli asked quietly, "And me?" I held his gaze. "You get silence until I want your version again." He swallowed. "That sounds like punishment. It sounds like the first thing here that belongs to me." That shut him up. I took my phone out, opened the rideshare app, and booked a car right there at the table. Not because I couldn't have done it in the hall, because both of them needed to see a choice happen that neither had shaped first. My mother watched, furious, in a contained way. Eli watched, hurt and cornered, and maybe still convinced that if the timing had been different, if the invite had surfaced privately, if the Sunday note had never been visible, he could have walked me through some gentler version of what he had built with Dana. Maybe he was right. Maybe I would have heard it differently alone. But the truth is, he had already spent too long deciding I needed edited information to stay manageable, and once that happens, intimacy changes even before anyone names it cheating. The car was 4 minutes away. I picked up my jacket, ignored the cake, and walked out of the alcove without hugging anyone, without thanking anyone for coming, without giving the room a neat final line to live on. Behind me, I heard my mother say my name once. Behind that, Eli said nothing at all. By the time I crossed the hotel lobby, the brunch had already started becoming story instead of event. I could feel it, the matching invite, the Sunday hour, the note about checking in before she went to her mom's again. My mother tying the lease to the scene. None of it clean enough to settle the question in one direction, all of it enough to make moving forward feel reckless. I still did not know whether Eli had crossed every line my family would instantly assume. I did know he had let another person occupy emotional space he kept telling me did not matter, and that he only seemed ready to be honest once the table forced him to be. Sometimes that is its own answer. Sometimes it is only the start of one. I got into the car before either of them could reach the lobby doors.